Hi, I'm Hugh from SRI, and in this video we're going to show you how to replace a part on this board in the GC that we call the display board. The display board has all these little black buttons mounted on it, and it also has all the little adjustment potentiometers. So it's not uncommon. We try to warn everybody that when you make an adjustment to one of the trim pots, which is short for trimmer potentiometer, that is what adjusts, for instance, the carrier gas pressure. We give you a little screwdriver, and you insert the screwdriver into the slot very carefully, and then you can adjust any of these parameters that have the black buttons from the top like that. But sometimes the trim pot breaks. It's usually because you put the screwdriver in without putting it in the slot and then start twisting, and it just kind of breaks the trim pot off the board. So if that happens, or if one of these buttons for some reason is not working properly, then you need to get access to this board. And unfortunately, this board is one of the harder things to get access to, which is why we're doing this video, because it's difficult to explain all this on the phone. So it'll be a lot easier if you have to do this. Hopefully you don't, but if you have to do this, it will be a lot easier if you follow what I'm going to do. So the first thing we really have to do is take the front panel off to get access to this. So I've already removed the screws from the side of the GC so that we can get inside the GC. We'll need to do that in a minute, but we first have to take off this front panel. So there's a few hex head screws that have to come off. So this is a 5/64 hex head wrench, 5/64, and you really need to use an American size wrench, even though some parts of the world they're hard to get. But if you don't, you'll strip the little heads. So I'm gonna start taking the screws out. So there's 6 of these, 3 on each side. And then there's 2 more here on the front. And then these 2 little rubber feet, they need a Phillips head screwdriver to unscrew. And now I'm going to flip the GC on its back. GC is happy on its back. It's just happy to sit there. And then this circuit board, this whole front panel comes loose. And this is the board that we're talking about. We call it the display board because it's the board where we display all the different parameters on the readout. So it's very common, for instance, for these little trim pots. This is what would be adjusted with the screwdriver to adjust the carrier pressure or the hydrogen pressure or the air, or there's many little adjustments. Depending on how your GC is constructed, there may be many of these little pots. But if this was broken and we had to replace it, we'd have to take this board off and then unsolder this and then put a new one in. So we're going to do that. So I'm going to lay this down as best I can like that, and then take off a bunch of little nuts. Now these are 1/4-inch nuts. So you can do it with a wrench. You could do it with a wrench like that, but it's kind of tedious to do that. So I'm going to use this hex driver tool, right? So you undo the nut, and then underneath the nut there's a lock washer, right? So I want to be really careful not to lose those lock washers or let them fall into the GC. So the trick for that is just take your time, go slow, and don't lose any of the little parts in the GC. So I'm gonna remove, maybe it makes sense to remove all the nuts first, and then I'll come back for the lock washers one by one, maybe with a little pair of pliers or something, so that if I can't grab it with my fingernail, I can get it with the small pliers. Okay, just 4 more, I think. Okay, so I got all the nuts off, and now I'm gonna take all the little lock washers off. So some combination of getting your fingernail under there and maybe a little help from a pair of pliers. Work slow so you don't lose any of these. There we go. That was a hard one. Okay, got that one. That one. Got this one. Got that one. Okay, now there's one more that I didn't loosen before that's got this little post to kind of corral some of these wires. So that one is a little different. And I'll need, this one's got a little standoff securing it. Hopefully this is my last little lock washer. Okay, so sorry, we warned you this was a tedious operation. So here's the real part that we want to warn you about, is that there's little brown spacers under all these screws that I disconnected, right? And these spacers are not secured on there, right? They'll fall off if you let them, right? So I'm gonna try to wiggle this board off like this. And it may be that you have to loosen or remove some of these wires. These are phone cords, actually, so it would make it a little easier if you remove these phone cords. You can see someone's done it before and labeled them, which is a good idea, to label them so that you don't have to guess when you're putting them back. Okay, so I'm going to try to make sure that I don't tip this over, because if I tip it over, all those little brown things are going to go and disappear, and you need them when you put everything back together. All right, so here now you can see those. I'm going to have to cut a tie wrap here because it's preventing me from moving the board away. Tie wraps are just kind of neat things. They're not really essential for the operation of the GC. They just make the wiring look neat. Okay, so here now I'm going to try to, so there I've got now access to the board, right? So here I could unsolder this trim pot here. I could unsolder that from the board because I have access to this side of the board now. But do you see all these little brown spacer things? And it looks like one is missing. So somebody has probably done this before on this GC and lost one of them. And of course it didn't really matter. But if you lose a lot of them, then the board will flex when you push the buttons. And that's why the spacers are there, is to keep the board kind of stiff so that when you push all these buttons, the board doesn't flex. Anyway, so that's how to get the board out. We're not going to talk about how to unsolder things. You have to be a a capable soldering person to remove one of these little trim pots. These are very cheap, they're less than $1, but when they break, it's more than $1's worth of work to get at them, to replace them. But if you have to do it, this is how you do it. And then reassembly, of course, is just the opposite. You put everything back together. We don't need to show that on this video. The main thing was to show you how to get the board out without losing all the little parts. So thank you for your attention.